Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms, and check out their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. And if you ever miss a Football at 4, you can always check it out on the Inside the Birds platform on their YouTube channel. Geoff Mosher's here. We are just about a week away from the draft. A week from tomorrow, the Eagles will pick number 22. You have all the intel, Geoff Mosher. Who are they taking? Tell us now, buddy.
Hold on. Let me get the envelope, unwrap it, pull out the I'm going to do this Al Pacino style. I'll mutter my way through naming the prospect. Now,
yeah, what people don't realize is Mosher is actually the guy that walks the envelope up to the commissioner.
That's me. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, no, the draft is it's coming up here, Mike, and we've done a lot of work. We know who've taken their top 30 visits. We know who the Eagles have worked out. We know who they talked to at the combine. It doesn't mean they're going to draft anybody from that group, but it's likely when you look in the history of what they've done, they usually draft guys that they did put a significant amount of work in, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so a couple intel on the visits, some just amateur stuff that I've seen. I saw Max Melton was there yesterday. I don't know that he counts as a visit. Apparently he's a local player, so that doesn't count for one of your 30 visits. He did post on Instagram that he was in Philly. That would be a pretty interesting pick because he's like a second or third rounder, probably a second rounder. Cooper DeJean is another guy who met with only 4 teams, Philadelphia being one of them. Another report from James Palmer, formerly of the NFL Network, saying the Eagles have hosted pretty much all of the top corners in this year's draft. They've really done work at the position, and at 22 could be a spot to land one. They have not drafted a corner in the first round since Lito Shepherd over 20 years ago. So Max Melton, Cooper DeJean, and that report there. Do we know the pick? Is it a corner, Geoff Mosher?
And the pick will be no. So two things. Let's work backwards. First of all, on Max Melton being in Philly on Wednesday, he was there as part of the team's local pro day. They have one of these every year, which, yes, you're right, it doesn't count as a 30 visit. But what they do is they invite kids from all. There's a certain amount of miles you're allowed to either live within if you're from that area. Or if you went to college within a certain number of miles from the team facility, you can go attend the local pro day. So Max Melton, who's from your area, your guys neck of the woods in Cedar Creek there, went to Rutgers. He was part of the local pro day. I believe they had some Temple kids there, Villanova running back, an edge rusher from East Stroudsburg. So that's all part of the local pro day. I don't want to make too much of it. Obviously, there's interest in Max Melton. They've been interested in him since the entire pre-draft cycle, and he's a guy who will probably be a top 50 pick. So, yeah, that's a real interest in them. But I just wanted to separate sort of the 30 visit from the local pro day. Well, you'll have kids who range anywhere from, first, second round to priority free agent to maybe, just trying to get into a camp. So the second question you ask is a really good one. Are the Eagles well-positioned, based on that tweet that you read from James Palmer, to finally draft a cornerback at 22 overall in the first round? And my answer would be, no, they're not well-positioned for that, Mike. And the reason I say that is because Adam Kaplan and I did a podcast last week where we did a mini mock draft. We just did the first 22 picks, and we tried to figure out what kind of cluster of player would be available at 22, given what goes 1 to 21. The best we know, obviously, there's always surprises. But the main corners, and this happens every year because there's always a run on corners once the first one goes off the board, we didn't have those corners lasting to 22. I'm talking about Quinyon Mitchell. I'm talking about Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins. Now, Cooper DeJean is a different case because he's seen differently. He's not necessarily seen by every team as an outside corner. Some see him as a safety. Some see him as a hybrid player. I don't know if he was there at 22, if the Eagles would jump on him because they really need, and they do need a nickel, but they need an outside corner too. And I don't know at this moment exactly where they view him at his best position.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people would take a look at him, and some would say he's a corner. Some would say he's a safety. He's been described as kind of a jack of all trades. Maybe, if on this particular team, the Eagles look at him one way. I would imagine if he's here for a visit, though, are they looking at him as a safety?
The visit doesn't mean that they're looking at you at a certain position. He had a medical issue, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And did not.
He had
work
a fractured
out.
fibula that he suffered in mid-November that basically ended his season.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you have that, you're going to get a lot of visits because people want to medically check you out to see where you're at, even though he did wind up having his own testing day and that people will see. So that's a big part of it. And then the second thing is, and this isn't often, it's not common, but it does happen, where a prospect takes a 30 visit, the team gets more intel, and the team decides, I don't really like that guy that much. He didn't have a great visit. So we can't just assume that everybody who goes in for their visit came out in the same situation, or that the Eagles really liked him. A lot of this is for intel gathering, and not all the intel you gather is going to be great. Everybody remembers the Darius Geis, the running back from LSU, a couple of years ago, who Washington drafted in the first round. There were some concerns about him, and he had a visit with the Eagles, and I was told at the time it went interestingly. We'll leave it at that. And as Washington took him. He's out of the league 2 years later.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here. Let's discuss some early picks, day 1, day 2 picks here. And let's look at the offensive line. Let's start there because I think a lot of people, if I said, what's the most highest possibility? I think a lot of people think offensive line is either 1 or 2 on the list of the highest possible pick at number 22. So let's take a look at some of the, possible players at that position.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously, this is the strength of the draft in the first round. You're going to see guys go off quickly. Joe Alt, Olufashinu, Talisi Fuaga, J.C. Latham. When we did our mini mock draft and got to 22 in ours, Troy Fautanu from Washington, who can play guard or tackle, was still available, and we thought that would be a no-brainer for the Eagles, a guy who could, start right away at right guard and eventually move to right tackle when Lane Johnson, if Lane Johnson retires soon. We said that about Kelsey a couple of years ago. So that to me was a no-brainer, but he's also a guy that could go before that, but that might knock down someone else like a Latham or a Fuaga, maybe Tyler Guyton. Tyler Guyton did take a visit to the Eagles. He's a very, very athletic offensive tackle. I don't know if they view him as someone who can play guard. I don't know that matters either, but just an interesting name there for rounds 1. And if you get into round 2, the Eagles did a lot of work, Mike, on interior offensive linemen, guys like Brandon Coleman from TCU and Cooper Beebe from Kansas State. Both of those guys had visits. There's another tackle who can play on the right side from Washington. He played opposite Fautanu. His name is Roger Rosengarten. Zach Zinter at Michigan. So Christian Mahogany, Boston College. These are guys the Eagles have either met with at the combine or brought into the facility.
All right, Geoff, that's offensive line. We know they like those spots. So 1, pick 22. 2, they have pick 50 and 53. So likely an offensive lineman in one of those 3 spots there, and possibly trades are always in play with Howie Roseman. What about the edge rushing spot and that defensive tackle? They've taken Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis. They signed Bryce Huff. They brought back Josh Sweat, reworked his deal there. Do they need more edge defensive tackle help that early in the draft?
Yeah, well, whether they need it or not, they prioritize the edge. Well, they prioritize the entire defensive line, so you can never rule it out. The obvious names that are connected to them because of visits and attention are Leatu Latu from UCLA, who is there this week, and Chop Robinson from Penn State, an undersized but really explosive guy. The struggle here is to identify where these guys are going to go because they're both very high upside guys. Robinson, for all the explosion, just not a lot of productivity from a sack standpoint at Penn State. So you can definitely see him going in the first round. You you could see him slipping a little bit. Latu is, we talked about this on the podcast, as far as hand usage, refinement, maybe the best overall pass rusher in the draft, but he spent his first 2 years at Washington and then had a neck injury and was not medically cleared to play there after that. He did go finally get medically cleared, but it was at UCLA. He was Defensive Player of the Year. But obviously the neck, that issue that he had that didn't clear him medically at Washington is going to be asked about. It's going to be dissected. He's going to go through all the medical testing. I have spoke to some teams already that have said that it's a concern. So I don't know if I've seen things where, this guy's going to be a top 5 pick, top 10 here, and tell you, Mike, that he's definitely a first round pick. But if he makes it to the second round where the Eagles have 2 picks, you got to think that they would feel less risk averse because it's not a first rounder there with Latu.
Yeah, obviously talking. I don't know if you saw the tweet from Griffin III, who said he thought the Eagles have the best roster in the NFL after signing Devontae Smith, saying, hey, they got these 2 wide receivers and they have the best roster in the NFL. And you're looking on the defensive side of the ball. I don't even know that their defensive line is better than the line that they had last year. Is Huff better than Reddick? Is the 2 guys that they've taken in the first round going to make such a jump that they're going to outproduce what Fletcher Cox gave you last year? I mean, to me, suggesting that they're even better at those positions is kind of crazy right now. So the edge rusher definitely, I think, is in play when you're taking a look at the picks that we're discussing here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, our football at 4. All right, let's get into defensive back. We kind of touched on it a little bit. Corner, safety, a lot of names there. We've heard a lot of Nate Wiggins. He keeps being mocked in a lot of spots. But who else could be a possibility in these areas?
Yeah, let me just address Nate Wiggins because he's a fascinating case of a guy who runs a 4.2, right? Like a high 4.2 40. So, and his athletic testing is unbelievable, but he's also only 170 pounds. So I know we saw Emmanuel Forbes go I think he went in the first round last year to Washington, and he's similar. But I tell you, people told you when you watch the tape of Emmanuel Forbes, they would say, hey, man, this guy is willing to stick his nose in there and make a tackle. The feedback on Nate Wiggins is not the same as I got on Forbes in that regard. So, but he ran so fast. You know, those teams that obsess over speed every year, like the Raiders, that's almost a team that you got to watch for in those situations. But again, he's a little bit polarizing in that regard. I would say, Mike, that if the Eagles don't get a corner in round 1, I would be very shocked if they did not use a pick in round 2 where they have 2 picks on a corner. I mean, I would be really surprised given how much their need is, not just now, but for the future, to finally get a young developmental corner into their program and have that guy developed. And, you mentioned Max Melton. I think he'd be the perfect kid because he can play inside and outside. I think he would challenge Avonte Maddox to start at nickel right away. And if he was good enough, he'd probably bounce Maddox off the roster right away. Much like many years ago when Chip Kelly, Brandon Boykin. Was it Brandon Boykin?
Yeah.
He came in right away and bounced, I think, Joselio Hansen off the roster because he was good enough to start right away at nickel, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be a kid, along with Ennis Rakestra, who is a little bit wiry as far as his build, but I know Christian Parker from the Eagles D-backs coach was at Missouri to lead the pro day there. So those would be some names.
Yeah. By the way, Brandon Boykin, good pull. I think a 4th-round pick out of Georgia. I'll have to get fact-checked on that one, but if memory serves me, that's another Georgia guy. Just throwing that out there. Yes, Josh is giving me the thumbs up. Brandon Boykin, 4th-round pick, Georgia. I'm not losing my mind. All right. Off-ball linebacker. Is it preposterous for me to even ask about that position at pick 22, potentially 50 or 53?
It's not preposterous about 50 or 53. Totally preposterous of you to ask about 22. You absolutely know they're not going to draft an off-ball linebacker at 22. But just like I mentioned with corner, if they especially if they do get a corner with the 2nd round pick, I can see them hitting off-ball linebacker with their first pick in the second round. If Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M, who could sneak into the end of the first round, if he's there, which I don't think he will, but if he's there at 50, that's a guy the Eagles have paid a lot of attention to. Junior Colson from Michigan's another one. And, of course, Jeremiah Trotta Jr. Now, he may be more round 3, or maybe if they trade down in the second round with that second pick. I'm not sure he's top 50, 55. I think that's sort of beauty in the eye of beholder. But, Mike, just in general, if they don't get an off-ball linebacker in there, they don't have to. They signed Devin White, they signed Oren Burks, they signed Zach Bond, but these are all one-year deals, right? And Nakobe Dean has not stayed healthy. They really do need a young building block linebacker to, like their next Jordan Hicks, or even before that, it was God, who was their next? Who was Jordan Hicks before Jordan? I don't know. They thought Nakobe Dean was going to be that, but they really need one. So if they get corner or offensive line first round, I wouldn't be surprised at all if their 50th overall pick went to off-ball linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a need. You're right. I mean, you take a look at, again, going back to the comments that Robert Griffin III made, that this is the best roster in the league. I'm certainly sure they're not better at linebacker than they were even last year, and that's saying something.
Yeah, although a lot of people would argue, I mean, they certainly argued me on the whole Devin White signing that he's better than what they had last year. I'm not 100% sure that he's certainly a better athlete than they had. But again, Zach Cunningham played at a fairly decent level for the Eagles. And if the one thing you could say about Cunningham is he plays an intelligent game, he knows how to tackle, he knows what spot he needs to be in. He may not be the fastest, most athletic guy, but he can make a tackle. Yeah. Whereas White is fast, is athletic, but is out of place and was known for overrunning plays and over pursuing. So I don't know.
It's the sports culture that we live in, Moshe. The baseball, the guy will take the guy throwing 98 but can't throw strikes, and Ranger Suarez gets overlooked because he doesn't throw faster than 92. I'll take Suarez. You take the guy not throwing strikes.
I love it. I agree.
All right. What about any other intel on some 30 visits, combine interviews, workouts, some of the names that you've been hearing that the Eagles could have some interest in of those 30 visits that they're allowed to take?
At any position or specifically?
Yeah, just in general, because obviously we just looked at the defensive side of the ball here. Are there more defensive players that we should be watching? Any guys on the offensive side of the ball? Because on the offense, we did talk about offensive line, but are there any skill position players, maybe a tight end or a third wide receiver? They're probably going to need another running back in this draft.
Yeah, so let's say the Eagles go get an offensive lineman in the first round, and in the second round with their 2 picks, they go corner and linebacker, right? If that's the case, you could still see them looking to address the edge rusher on day 3. Now, Andrew DeCecco has been writing a lot on our website, InsideTheBirds.com, about some day 3 edge guys that he knows the Eagles have checked out. One of them's, this is an interesting name, an interesting school, Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian. He actually started his college career as a safety at Cornell, got bigger, went to Houston Christian, finished up there as an edge rusher. He did have, I believe, he did have one of his 30 visits was with the Eagles. So that's an interesting name there, Jalix Hunt. He's an edge rusher, very explosive guy. That has a lot of, he needs to be refined, but he's got a lot of traits. And the Eagles love traits guys on day 3. And then in that same mold, Jeremiah Washburn, who coaches the outside linebackers, the pass rushing outside linebackers, the Bryce Huffs and what Hassan Reddick was. He flew out to Colorado State to have a private workout with an edge rusher there named Mohamed Kamara, who is, again, raw, a little bit developmental, but plays just, up-tempo, high motor, violently. So those are 2 names I would focus in on for day 3. That's Saturday, if the Eagles are still looking to hit the edges on defense.
All All right, Geoff Mosher will have plenty more. A week from the drafts tomorrow, Andrew will be here. We'll get his thoughts on some of the prospects that have been coming in here, who he thinks could be a good fit. You can listen to the Inside the Birds podcast to follow all the trend. What are the keys to the most successful Eagles drafts? The guys were talking about that. You can get that on all podcasting platforms. And, of course, on their YouTube channel, you can just search Inside the Birds for these football at fours. Geoff Mosher, my friend, it is good to catch up with you. Next time we talk, we are going to be in draft week.
I can't wait, Mike. It's going to be fun.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you then. Geoff Mosher, everybody, from the Inside the Birds podcast right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.